All right, everybody. So let's get started here. Let me check real quick if we can hear the audio. Can you hear me, Mo?
Yes, sir. You are good to go. Audio's coming through loud and clear.
Awesome. All right. Well, my name is Kotecki. Thank you so much for joining me in this webinar today. I am the software and video educator here at ON1. I also have Mo writing along with me, answering any questions you guys have inside the Q&A dialogue. So if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, even if they're basic or just you need a tip or something, feel free to hit up that Q&A, and Mo should be answering questions throughout. And then, if one is pertinent to what I'm doing on the screen, or I can go over something live, he'll stop me and ask those questions for you guys. Another reminder that this webinar is actually being recorded today. So if you do need to dip out at any time or leave, we're going to have this recorded and we're going to post it onto our blog and our YouTube and our Facebook later today. So again, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to hit up the Q&A, and then the webinar is being recorded. We also have a short poll that I'm going to launch right now. So if you guys do need to, if you guys want to answer some of these questions, it'll give me a better idea about how to run the webinar, and then it'll give us a better idea about who's seeing the webinar so we can improve our webinars in the future. So I just launched that masking and brushing poll. Feel free to answer those questions, and I'll get started. So a little bit about today's webinar. We're going to be going over masking and brushing. And so first we're going to start out pretty basic. We're kind of just going to define what a mask is. And then I'm going to go over a few of the different ways that you can create masks. There's sort of your basic ways, just creating them with a masking brush or adjustable gradients. And then you can use a luminosity mask or a color range mask. You can also copy and paste masks. So at the beginning of this webinar, it's going to be sort of basic. Just want to get kind of everybody up to speed. So stay tuned with me, and then we'll kind of get more into the advanced side where we'll be kind of replacing some skies and really kind of refining our masks. So another couple things we'll be going over is how to brush on masks and sort of what techniques you can use for different brushes and some different keyboard shortcuts to use with your brushes. We'll also go over how to use different local adjustments on your masks, and then also how to refine your masks with the different refining tools that we have available. So to get started here, we're actually just going to start out with what a mask is in digital photography. And so to explain that, I'm just going to add a filter here, and I'm just going to add a texture. And you'll notice that once I applied this filter onto my photo, it's applied to the entire photo. Well, basically, a mask in digital photography is essentially a non-destructive edit that's applied on top of your photo. If you think about your photo as like an actress or an actor, you're kind of the makeup artist when it comes to your masks. So your adjustable gradients and your masking brush are kind of the tools that you're going to use to paint on those edits onto your photo, and henceforth adding different styles onto your shot. So at the core of masks is basically white and black. So if I go into here, which I went into my masking view options, I'll just add it again so you guys can see. So I added a filter, and I added a texture, and then to access my masking options, I just went into this little dialog here, and if you hover over it, it'll tell you show hide masking options. So you click in there, and this is going to show your mask. So if I view this mask, it's entirely white. This is showing my entire mask on the photo. So you'll notice that if I use my masking brush here and I brush something out, it turns it black. That means it's removing part of that mask from my photo. If I have this entire thing white, it's revealing all of that onto my shot. White reveals, and if I invert this mask, which is basically just inverting it from white to black, if I invert it and turn it black, that means black is concealing the entire mask. So that's a great rule of thumb whenever it comes to masking, is white reveals, black conceals. And it's a good thing if you need to write it down just so you can have it in the back of your head, because it can be confusing sometimes, especially if you're using different opacities and using different grays to mask in, which we'll get into later in this video. But at the core of masks is simply white reveals and black conceals. So now that we have our entire filter concealed from our image, now what we can do is we can start brushing in our mask and apply it onto our shot. And there's a couple different ways that you can do that. We're actually going to start out with the masking brush. To access the masking brush, you can either add a filter and then it will grab the masking brush for you, or you can simply click this icon here, or a nice keyboard shortcut to access your masking brush is to simply hit B on your keyboard. B on your keyboard for brush, and you can get it anytime. So another quick tip, if you guys are ever kind of confused on keyboard shortcuts, is just hover over these icons, and in the parentheses, it'll give you the keyboard shortcut to access those. So as you'll see on here, it has blur mask tool, which is L, your masking bug, which is M. So those are just quick ways to learn the keyboard shortcuts. So now that I have my masking brush selected, there's a couple different things as far as the masking brush that you kind of need to know before you start masking. And one of those is your mode. And when it comes to mode, this is basically changing if you want to paint in a certain filter or local adjustment, or if you want to paint that out. And since we inverted this mask and none of that mask is being applied onto our shot, what we want to do is we want to paint this mask in. So to change our brush size, you'll see, or to change our brush mode, you'll see that in the middle of the circle, there's a minus sign. That's just meaning that it's painting the mask out. So if we want to change that, we can head up to our mode here and go down and select paint in. Or you can simply hold shift on your keyboard and then hit X. And it'll automatically change that from a paint out to a paint in. And the size of your brush is kind of really dependent on what you're masking out or masking in. You know, if you have really delicate areas that you want to mask, you probably want to change the size. A quick way to change the size rather than going up and scrolling this or, you know, going down here and moving this is to simply use the bracket keys on your keyboard. So the left bracket is going to decrease your size, and the right bracket is going to increase your size. So those are just a couple quick ways that you can change or modify your bracket or your brush size so that's easier for you for your workflow. So now that we have sort of a nice brush size, now we want to determine what we need to do as far as feathering goes. I kind of lean towards the high feather side, I guess, whenever I'm brushing anything out, because it makes sort of a soft edge. And with soft edges, it's easier to blend. So for example, if I turn this feathering down all the way and I paint this in, you'll notice that it's an incredibly hard edge around this texture. You know what, I'm actually going to go down here. I'm going to change the texture real quick. I'm sorry about that. I'm just going to change it to a better sky. And I'll actually just go to darken. So there we go. So now you'll see that it's, once I painted in this texture right here, it's an incredibly hard edge and it kind of looks a little unnatural. But if I turn the feathering up to like, I don't know, 50, and then I brush this in, you'll notice that has a much softer edge. It's basically just how hard or soft you want your brush to be. Like I said earlier, I tend to lean to the side of feathering up to 100 just because it's pretty easy to redo and sort of edit out your mistakes in Photo RAW since masking is incredibly intuitive in Photo RAW. So now that my feathering is at 100 and I brush, you'll see how much softer that is from the original one and then the second one. So I tend to keep mine at 100 just to maintain some blendability. So we'll just reset that mask and invert it again. And the next thing you need to determine is your opacity. And the opacity is basically on a slider scale from black to white, and the in-between areas would be the different opacities for your mask. For example, if I turn this opacity down to about, I don't know, 45, and I view my mask, and now I just paint a streak, you'll notice how that streak is gray. Well, if I grab my opacity and I turn it up to 100, and I paint this streak, you'll notice that that streak is completely white. That means it's completely revealing 100% of that mask onto my photo. Whereas this streak up here is only revealing about 50% of that mask. So masks work on, again, a scale from black to white, and then all of the in-between is basically how you're going to blend the mask or how you're going to make sure that you have all of the different masks on your photo blended correctly. So if we go back and we view our mask on our texture on our photo, sorry, you'll see that this revealed a lot more of the mask down here than it did up here. And that's because I was just using a different opacity. So now we're I'll just Control Z on those two. And the next option that you can use for your brush to add in your mask is your perfect brush. And the perfect brush is simply going to differentiate between tones so that you're not masking out a certain area on your foreground or your background. So to better explain that, I'm just going to increase my brush size a ton. And you can see that I have basically a third of my brush on the lighthouse here. Well, since I have that plus sign sitting in the sky area on my foreground, it's going to differentiate between those two tones, and it's going to mask in the area on the sky and not on the lighthouse. So if I just simply brush this on, you'll notice that it's brushing out the area around my lighthouse, but it's not actually brushing out my lighthouse. And that's because the perfect brush is separating the different tonalities in my sky and allowing me to brush out my background rather than my foreground. The perfect brush is a great tool to use whenever you have large tonalities in your photo. For example, if you have a sky like this where it's either all white or all gray, or maybe you have a city skyline where there's a bunch of just blue sky in the background, the perfect brush is a great tool to use whenever you're trying to brush in textures or filters or local adjustments on top of a large tonality. So even further, we can do this if we just want to replace this entire sky. We can just simply go around and we can just brush. And this isn't going to work for every situation, so I wouldn't rely too much on the perfect brush every time, but if you can get it to work, I would definitely take advantage because it's an incredibly powerful tool, especially when it comes to replacing or removing large tonality areas on your shot. So we'll just kind of get this a little bit hemmed up here. But you'll see that, just in a few minutes, I masked out this entire sky in, with one texture. So it's, it's pretty powerful. As far as the masking goes inside of ON1 Photo RAW, there's probably not a whole lot you can't do when it comes to adding or removing filters and effects. It's too intuitive. So now that we've replaced this, our sky with this sort of cloudy texture, now if we zoom in here, you'll see that there's sort of an edge around our lighthouse. I guess before I get into this, is there any questions, Mo?
No, it doesn't look like there are any questions. So just as a reminder to those of you who are just joining us, there is a Q&A module. So feel free to ask any questions that come through, and I will pass them up to Dylan.
Awesome. Thanks, Mo. So you'll see that we have, I can probably zoom in here a little further. Oops. All right. Anyway, you guys can probably see that little fringe around the lighthouse, right? So basically, whenever you're masking, it's kind of hard to get the entire thing perfect, especially in the first go. And that's why we have refinement tools. And refinement tools are a little bit of a more advanced thing instead of masking, but they honestly shouldn't be because they're incredibly easy and they're probably the easiest thing to use within the masking world because they're what refines your mask, and they're going to do the job for you. You don't really have to do a whole lot. They're incredibly intuitive, especially when it comes to masks. So the first one I want to call out is the Chisel Tool. And the Chisel Tool is a great tool for when you're refining the edge around your mask. The Chisel Tool is basically going to remove any sort of fringe or excess around the border or edge of your mask. So there's two different ways that you can apply the Chisel Tool. You can either double click it, and if you double click the Chisel Tool, it just says icon here, it will remove whatever excess you have slated up here as far as your mode or your amount. It will remove that from the edge of your mask. So I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. So before you do that, let's go up to the mode here. And just like before with the masking brush, you're going to want to decide whether you want to remove part of your texture to remove some of that edge, or you want to add in part of your texture so that you can add in more of the edge. And with this one, we see that this is the white area. So it's the white that was already in our sky. So we know we want this Chisel Tool to add more of our cloud texture around our lighthouse. And also the size is basically just going to be the Chisel Tool brush, but you'll notice that the size is, you don't have to be exact with the size on the Chisel Tool brush. And then the amount is just how much of that edge you want to remove. I tend to like to keep it around 10, under 10, just because any more than that, you kind of go overboard with it, and you can always double click it a couple times or brush over it a couple times. So say we want to just remove it from this entire edge, we can just double click our Chisel Tool here. And you'll notice that it removed, some of that white fringy edge from around our lighthouse. And we can click it again. I'm just going to go back so that I can show you the brushing part of it. And you'll see this fringe around the edge right here. Well, if you don't want to just remove it from the entire border, what you can do is you can use this Chisel Tool, and you can just simply brush the edge that you want to remove around, and it'll remove it for you instantly.
Hey, Dylan, I just want to jump in with a couple questions here that have come through. That would probably be pretty easy for you to show, maybe not on this mask, but maybe the next one. Arthur is asking, does resetting the mask at any point always take it back to the start, or just the last portion that is unmasked?
I can answer that now. It takes it back to the beginning. It resets the entire mask to white.
Perfect. And then there's a question from Sherry. And there was actually another question earlier. I think there's some confusion on when you say that the mask is being painted in. Sherry asks, I'm not sure when you say what the mask is being painted in. Aren't you painting in the texture? And I know there's been a couple other questions that have come through. So if you could kind of just speak to that a little bit, what masking versus painting in a mask, painting in a texture is.
Totally. So basically, think about your mask as your texture or as your filter. It's so much easier to think about masking when you just think about the mask as the filter itself, rather than thinking about it as, two different things. So your mask in here is basically just where you're applying that filter or texture onto. Again, think about it as like your photo is your actor and you're the makeup artist and you're trying to improve or add different edits onto your actor or actress's face. The mask is simply what you're applying onto it. You'll say you're applying a mask onto your actor, and then the different brushes over here are just how you're going to refine where you put that mask. So basically, when you're painting on a mask, you're just painting on that filter or texture. And then however, the different ways that you paint it on, by whether using the masking brush and different opacities and feathering, is just how you're going to refine where you paint that mask or effect onto. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, I think that that definitely helps out a lot. And I think just to kind of expand upon that, painting in the mask is kind of just the global term for how we would paint in a filter or paint out a filter.
Exactly.
So yeah, you can keep on going, Dylan. Great job.
Yeah, it's just basically you're just painting in that filter, and then your mask is sort of the middleman on how you want that filter to be applied to your shot, I guess. So, okay, anyway, to continue here, zoom in here, and you'll see that I have this area kind of cleaned up in here as far as the edge goes. But if I go down here, you'll see that this area down here is a little bit, this area still has some fringe around it a little bit, and down in this area. So again, you could just easily grab the chisel tool and you could just brush that on. And it'll just remove that fringe from around whatever object you're trying to mask around, and it'll give you, a nice clean edge rather than having this white fringe all the way around it. So that's a great tool for whenever you're trying to refine an edge around something. And so the next tool I'd probably use whenever you're trying to refine a mask is you can go in here to your refine brush. I didn't even notice there was a person in this photo until just now. I'm sorry if you guys can't stop looking at that person now, but there's a person at the bottom of my shot. So anyway, if you want to refine a mask edge, which basically the refine brush is going to kind of clean up your edges around your mask edge, kind of by using content-aware technology. It's basically just going to, say you have a person with hair or a model with hair that's kind of out in the background, and you want to remove the background and replace it, or say you have some grass or leaves like you do here, you could easily just brush this in. Oops, actually, I'm going to make the brush size smaller. Sorry. So we're going to make sure our mode is set to paint in, because we're going to paint in this mask and refine it. And then what you can do is just simply paint in this area around, you know, your grass or trees or whatever it may be. What? My masking refine brush is not working like it should. Anyway, so, whoops. Sorry about that, guys. We'll get back to square one here. So we'll go back to square one, and we'll just redo this mask so I can show you a different way to add a mask, and then we'll go back and refine it. So just to recap on a few of the things that I just went over, basically a mask, and we'll reset this mask. So basically a mask, when you apply any filter or local adjustment onto your photo, the mask is going to show up as all white or all black. And all white is going to reveal the entire mask onto your shot, and all black, like if I invert it, is going to conceal all of that filter or mask from your photo. So there's a few different ways that you can add a mask. You can do it, you know, in sort of the basic way with using your masking brush, and you can brush through here. Or there's a couple different ways that you can create a mask without using your masking brush, and I'm going to go over those just in a second. So the first way, rather than what I did before when I grabbed my masking brush and I painted it in around the sky, is if I turn this mask, if I invert this mask, you'll see that I have sort of this really white sky background behind my subjects here. And a great masking tool to use is your luminosity masking. And luminosity masking is basically, it's going to use the brightness, the different areas of brightness in your photo to create a mask. So if I reset this mask again, and I just hit lumen, which is going to be your luminosity mask, it's going to use, if I view the mask, you'll see that all of this area around my lighthouse is white. So it's basically creating a map of your photo and taking the brighter parts of your photo and turning them into the, you know, the white or gray areas that are revealing your filter. And then you have the darker areas on your photo that aren't showing anything because they're dark, and it's using the luminosity from them. And it's sort of masking out the sky background and then leaving the filter off of the subject area. And luminosity masking is a great way to do this, especially if you have a sky like this, or there's some other big tonal areas in your photo that you can use to create a luminosity mask. And another great tool you can use is the level and window slider. And basically these are just so over here is going to be your shadows. You're going to have your midtones, and then you're going to have your highlights. And you can kind of just play with them to sort of define and refine how you want that luminosity mask to be. And so with this, I'm just basically telling Photo RAW that I want my highlights to be added a lot more into the levels of my mask, so that more of this sky background becomes more white, and henceforth more of my filter is being shown onto my sky and less is being shown onto my subject here. So now if I view this, you'll see that the majority of this filter on the background is being applied to the sky, and there's little to none being applied to the lighthouse here. And that's simply just because I went in and I created a luminosity mask, which basically took the bright areas of my photo, made them a whiter, a white area, which they were kind of to begin with, and then took the darker areas of my shot and concealed the mask from them, and then revealed the mask onto, the brighter tones in my shot. And so you could sit here and you could just, play with the levels, and there's also this window slider down here that you can play with. So there's a ton of different ways that you can refine your mask, especially with just using luminosity masking. So there we go. So now if we view this, we have kind of a nice sky background that we did in 2 clicks, and then we kind of just move the levels. And then we can go in and you could just kind of refine it and you could take your perfect brush off and just kind of brush it around here just to make sure that there's nothing on here. And then if you view it, you have, you know, that black area that you painted out, and you've quickly created a nice mask by just simply creating a luminosity mask. Are there any other questions, Mo, at this point in time?
Yeah, there's actually there's one question that I'll speak to a little bit, and then I'll kind of let you go crazy with it afterward. There was a question from a gentleman about how you are doing a sky swap inside of effects. He thought, you know, layers is where you're going to do your sky swapping stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so just to let everyone know that there is an extras manager. So if you, right from the file menu in Photo RAW, if you ever have any kind of skies or textures that you want to add to Photo RAW, you just go to that Manage Extras area, and you can add any textures that are JPEGs or any kind of sky background that you want to add into Photo RAW. And in this case, these sky backgrounds are just JPEGs that were added to the Extras Manager in the Textures column. And so that just allows Dylan now to be able to access that sky as a texture inside of the Filters panel. And so he could also go into Layers and access his extras if you want to jump over into Layers in a little bit, Dylan, and kind of show them where those skies are and stuff.
Definitely.
And then to kind of jump onto that, some people are asking just what the difference is between masking in effects versus masking in layers. You know, they're kind of one and the same, but they kind of live on different levels. So if you could kind of speak to that a little bit, I think that would help a lot.
Definitely. Okay, so yeah, so like Mo was saying, if you do need to add any extras, so I guess I'll rewind a little bit. So basically, inside of effects, you have these different filters you can add, and then one of them is textures. And inside the textures lives this area where you can choose different textures to add onto your photo. So the preset categories have a ton of different textures you can add. You have different skies, and I just went into natural and added, you know, a nice cloud texture here. And there's a mode in these cloud textures that you can make them either, you know, normal, subtle, lighter, darker. You can completely replace them. I usually like to just hit darker, but I hit darker for this image because it was kind of a moodier photo. You can increase the opacity, and then, you know, in essence, you've basically just overlaid this texture onto your photo without actually having two different layers. The difference between using masking inside of effects or develop with local adjustments versus layers is the simple fact that you can't remove any of this photo layer. All you're doing inside of effects or local adjustments is you're adding on different masks, different mask layers, and then you're masking those mask layers on top of your photo. Whereas if you were in layers, you could add different photos, you know, for the lack of a better term, as masks, and then you could just mask those different photo layers on top of your photo, and that's kind of how you composite. So I would say layers is just basically is more of a kind of a complete compositing engine, whereas effects and develop with local adjustments are more where you're going to add non-destructive local adjustments on, or non-destructive edits onto your photo. So layers is kind of your compositing engine where you can mask out actual photo layers and then mask in different elements and stuff on top of your photo. Whereas effects and develop is where you're going to basically create different adjustments and then edits and then apply those onto your photo using masks. I hope that answered that question. I know I've been rambling, but
yeah, I think you did good. There is another question about doing a demonstration on hair, which I think you're going to get to in a little bit. But there's another customer who is wondering if you could take this image into layers without the texture applied and just knock out the sky, kind of how you would do that in layers and add a sky from the extras manager.
Totally.
If you could do that.
It's incredibly easy in layers. So basically I just had that layer in effects, right? And then I had that photo, in effects, and I just hit layers. So it took me into layers. And you'll notice right away that I have my layers side over here, which is basically, it's creating, it's turning my photo into a layer. And if it loads here, it may take a second. The Zoom conference is terrible when it comes to uploading this. But okay, so now we can go in here. I'm going to open the sidebar up. And so this is what you're going to see when you go inside of layers. And once you take your photo into layers, you're going to have the composite right here, your first layer. I'm just going to rename it main layer. And now, if like Mo was saying, if you need to add any extras, just head up to File, and then just click Manage Extras. And now you can go into backgrounds, and then you can add different, you know, JPEGs and stuff. I have different skies in here, and I have some birds that I can add on my shot. And you can just click Import, and you can find whatever photo you want, add. It's incredibly easy. Just go to Extras Manager, and then Import, and you'll figure it out. It's incredibly easy. So once you've added some in there, or if you don't want to add any, ON1 comes with a ton of different extras already preloaded into Photo RAW. So just click in ON1 Extras, and then Backgrounds. And then you can just find skies. And I'll just find a sky that might work here. I'm not sure. We'll try this one. So we'll add it as a layer. And then I can just move it. I'm just going to move it up and kind of just play with it a little bit to get it looking better. So there we go. So now I have my two layers. I have my sky layer, and then I have my main layer. If you're going to replace a sky or mask anything out like that inside of layers, I would recommend putting this top layer first and then lowering your opacity. And I actually have a photo, or a video on YouTube that I just posted last week about how to create a dynamic sky. And I do that all in layers. So I'll actually include the link in that the link to that in the description to this. So if you guys need a nice sky replacement video, you guys can check that out. But anyway, I lower the opacity, and then I can kind of move this around how I want it. And then once you've found how you want it to be, just up that opacity, and then put it as your bottom layer. Oops. Come on. So there we go. And now what we can do the same thing we did before, but rather than masking in this sky layer, we're going to mask out our main layer so that it reveals the bottom layer. So when it comes to layers and masking, if you're masking out the top layer, you're either going to reveal the bottom layer or you're going to conceal the bottom layer. So to show you what I mean, I'm just going to grab my masking brush. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, and I'm going to head up, and I'm going to increase the brush size with my bracket keys. I'm going to make sure my feathering's at 100. And again, I'm going to select Perfect Brush. And my mode is set to paint out, which is what I want, because I want to basically mask out part of this main layer, which if I start brushing, it's going to create a mask automatically, so that I can reveal this bottom sky layer onto my shot. And it's kind of a little different than effects in Develop, in the sense that you're not masking something on or off. You're kind of just masking out different layers so that you can reveal other elements onto your photo. But it works the same exact way. So if I just grab my perfect brush here, and I'll just go around like I did before, and I can just remove, you know, that sky layer, or that sky from my main layer, to reveal the underlying replacement layer onto my photo. It's basically, it's not on my photo, but you get what I mean. So there we go. And we did that pretty quickly. And then if you want to go in and you can kind of refine this, you're going to have the same masking tools that you do inside of effects, except for in this one, you actually have your line mask tool. And this is basically just going to, I'll show you how to use it. So if you zoom in here and you need to ever use this, it's basically just a way to create lines. So you're going to drop a point, and then you can drag it. You'll see that little line right there. You can drag it and then make another point, and then make another point, and make another point, and then you can, you know, kind of go around, and it's great for buildings or windows. You can kind of refine the edge that way, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. We'll just go like that. So now I have that square, and it'll make a little bucket, and you'll either remove it or add it. So if I remove it, it's going to remove that area that I masked. But if I, for example, were to brush out a little bit onto this building here, I could just make that mask real quick and then remove whatever area bled over. So you're going to have the same, we'll zoom out of that. You're going to have the same masking abilities as you do inside of Effects or Develop. So if you do want to use the Chisel tool to remove kind of this fringe, you could just click that. And then you'll see that it cleaned up that edge. So now if we zoom out, oops. So now if we zoom out, you know, we have this nice sky replacement that we did in, you know, 2 seconds using layers. And then you could just quickly go into Effects. Oops. Forgot I have to save it. I'm sorry. We're going to head back into layers. But is that, I guess for as far as the question goes, is that a good example of what layers are going to do? Okay.
Yeah, I think that that definitely helps a lot. Just kind of a final point to add to that, just you know, layers is going to actually cut out and mask the image you are on, the image layer, whereas masking and effects develop are going to be more of the filters level. So
exactly.
Same idea, same theory behind them, just kind of different levels of the photo. Yeah, great job. Keep on trucking through.
Definitely. Yeah, so basically, if you think about layers as you're using, instead of filters and local adjustments, you're using photos as your masks. And then in Effects and Develop, you're using filters and local adjustments as your mask. So, you know, it kind of just depends on what you're doing, but you can replace, like I was showing you, replace a sky pretty easily inside of Effects rather than layers. So, okay, we'll go back. So now we've kind of talked about how to kind of create a basic mask using a masking brush and then using a luminosity mask. So now what I'll show you is another way that you can create a mask, and that's by using a color range mask. So we'll head back here into my photos. And we have this photo here of some tulips, and we're just going to head into Effects again. And I'm going to show you guys real quick on how to create a color range mask. So I'm going to grab a filter here, and I'm just going to grab Color Enhancer. And to create a color range mask, which basically is just going to use whatever color you choose and create a mask with it. So I'm going to head into my masking options here, which is this kind of rectangle with a circle in it. That's always going to be your masking. You can click that. And now you have, like earlier, you have these different options. You have invert, luminosity, your density, filter. But hidden kind of at the bottom near this window, you have color range. Color range is one of the best mask tools, especially when you're using it with flowers or an image that has a ton of different colors, because you can specify which color you want to mask, and then you can desaturate or add that color as you please. So if I click this color range tool, and I go over here to my dropper, I can grab this dropper and say I want to, I don't know, take all of that kind of purple color out, or magenta, I'm kind of, whatever the color this is, away from these flowers in the background. I've selected that as my mask, and so if I view it, this color range here is always going to be set at 40. And so what you can do is you can pull it down to refine where you want that color to be. So now you notice that if I go back, it's masked out all of these blurry flowers in the background and left these alone. So now if I go down to my saturation here and I pull back on the saturation, it's desaturating all of those flowers in the back, but it's leaving all of these colors in the front because I don't have any of those colors set as my mask. But if I wanted to do that, I could just reset the mask, and I'll reset that. And I can just grab a color range again and say I want to remove all of the yellow. I can just grab my dropper tool here, drop it on a bit of yellow or orange, whatever color that is. And then we'll go and we'll view our mask, and then we'll refine it again with the color range. So now we have the kind of those yellow-orange colors selected. And we can do the same thing and say we want to, you know, decrease the saturation, you can do that. You could increase the saturation to give it a little bit more vibrance. You could also even go down and you could mess with the different color ranges in here to really specify how you want this mask to be applied onto your shot. So color range masks are an amazing tool, especially when you're using them for flowers or different colors that you want to differentiate in your image. And you're also going to have the same options as you did earlier. So we're just going to reset this again, and I'm going to grab those kind of these blue or these magenta colors back here. I'll click that. I'll view this again. We'll pull the color range down so that it's kind of just specific to those colors. We'll view it again, and then we'll desaturate. Well, say you wanted to bring a little bit of that color back, just kind of in here, you could just grab your masking brush like we did earlier, and you could paint in, oops, sorry. And you could remove, sorry, that mask from different areas on your photo so that you can really specify where you want that desaturation to be. Say, you know, you just, you know, want to keep a little bit of this blue, and maybe you want to export this and put some words in here, and you don't want any blue in the background. You know, you could do that easily with just using a color range mask. Are there any questions on this, Mo?
No, there's no questions. I think this one's a good one for people, really hitting home. So there is a question that this would probably be a good example, even though there's already a pretty strong depth of field. Jay Edwards is asking, can you use masks to blur a background?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you're right there, but you already kind of have a nice depth of field on this one. So if you have an image you could show. And then also Marisa is asking to see a demonstration on hair. I'm pretty much the same thing you've been doing, but if you could kind of show that perfect brush on hair, that'd be awesome.
Totally. Yeah, so we'll do the blur one first. Let me see if I can find a photo. I just had kind of 3 photos picked out here. So we'll do it on this one. This might be a good one. I'm sorry, Lighthouse, that I'm going to blur you out. But so if we head into effects here, and this is a great way to create lens blur. So if you want to, actually, we'll just kind of blur this log out. So a great way to create blur is to go in here, and I was going to save this till the end to show you guys this other way to use masks, but if you want to add lens blur, just click lens blur on here. And what you can do is, rather than using your masking brush, you can grab your masking bug, which is basically just, it's the same thing as your adjustable gradient, but it's just used for your filters rather than your local adjustments. So you can grab your masking bug, and you can drop this onto your shot, and then you can kind of, you know, play with the amount. So now it looks like I have kind of a, you know, a shallow depth of field here, and I have, you know, this more in focus, and this is, you know, kind of blurry so that it looks like I have that shallower depth of field. And then if I, you know, I could even reset it to, or sorry, invert it, and then I have, actually we'll pull this up. And then I have a nice, you know, sharp view of that log. And it's kind of, you know, toned down that area in my background. You know, I really do like the lighthouse back there, but I honestly do like the blur in the back too, because it kind of really adds a lot to this log. So that's a quick way that you can add blur to sort of give it a different depth of field. So we'll go back and we'll do a hair photo real quick. Just do portraits. And I mean, you guys have maybe seen this a million times, but I'm just gonna do it anyway because it's a perfect one. We'll just reset this photo here. So we have a reset raw photo, and say we want to replace the background around her. We can do that if we just add a filter, add a texture, and yeah, we'll use that. That's a perfect background for around her. So what we can do is, again, we're going to go in and we're going to invert our mask so that it's being concealed. The black is concealing all of the mask from our photo. And now what we want to do is we want to paint this texture in, but we don't want to paint it in around her face or her hair. So what we can do is we can go in and we can use the perfect brush and we can simply just brush this texture in around her without brushing on our actual subject, and we're just brushing on the background. And keep in mind that, okay, if you have, you know, like a model standing in front of a crazy background with a bunch of different colors and stuff, the perfect brush probably isn't going to be your best bet. It's kind of got a, it works a lot better with large tonalities as your background. You can definitely refine a mask if you have, you know, if you are in that instance, but if you're just looking to use the perfect brush, I would recommend having sort of bold tonalities in the background. So we'll just go in here. There we go. Now if we turn that on and off and view our mask, you'll see that the perfect brush kind of refined these edges here. And if you want to refine them even more, what you can do is you can go in here to your refine brush. We'll zoom. And you could just simply and it'll refine that brush a little bit better, or refine the texture a little bit better, and kind of make sure that the hair isn't bleeding over or that the texture isn't bleeding onto your model's hair. So I would just kind of use the refine brush and the perfect brush, you know, with each other, and then you can kind of get your, you know, your hairs added or removed as you please onto your photo. We'll redo that one. That wasn't very good, but you'll see that, you know, when I did it over there, it, you know, really kind of added onto here and added that texture back there. Does that work for that question, Mo?
Yeah, that's great. There's actually, jumping back one image, there was a question about the gradient mask.
Okay.
And just kind of what the lines, you know, what's the dotted line mean? What's the solid line mean? If you could kind of explain that.
Totally, that's my bad.
Yeah, and I think if you could just do the blur again and kind of show how that works on the mask level, I think that'd be awesome.
All right, so we'll add that blur again, and all of these like the brushes and the adjustable gradients and stuff, they're so easy to use. It's sad that people think they're so scary because they're just so easy to use. But so if we you know, kind of make our amount how we want it, and again, it's this masking bug, and it, like I said earlier, it's just basically your adjustable gradient, but for your filters. So just grab your masking bug, and you have different presets that you can use. Like you can make a vignette with one, so, or you could just use like linear top, linear bottom, linear left. I'm just gonna use linear top, or I mean, linear bottom rather. So there we go. And now that you drop it down, you'll notice that there's dotted lines on top. There's a dotted line on bottom. There's a tiny circle over here, and then a larger circle. This large circle is where you're going to select, and you can move it around your photo. This little circle is how you're going to rotate this adjustable gradient. And then these dotted lines here are your feather. So if you want a higher feather to make it a little bit more blended, you could do that. Or you could make it super concise and only, you know, put it on one part so that it, you know, this is all blurred out, but then this is all crisp still. So I would just think about it like that. You know, the dotted lines are your feather. This is how you rotate. And then this is how you move it. Does that answer it, Mo?
Yeah, I think that is perfect.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, we'll do that. So we'll just leave this actually on here because that was a great idea. I actually really do like this blur on here. So we'll leave that. And now what we can do is I can show you guys local adjustments. So what I want to do is say I want to add, you know, a little bit of dark in here in this area, but I want to leave, you know, my log here with a little bit of exposure. What I can do is, you know, since I added a local adjustment, which local adjustments are just non-destructive local adjustments that you can apply onto your photo as masks. So if I have this local adjustment here, I'm going to make sure it's set to darken. And then I'm going to head up here, and you'll notice that with my local adjustments, it's grabbing my local adjustment brush and not my masking brush. I wouldn't try to get too confused with that. Whenever you add a local adjustment layer, it's going to grab your adjustment brush for you. So I wouldn't worry too bad about trying to differentiate these two. Your masking brush is for your filters, and your local adjustment brush is it's for your local adjustments. So what you can do here, if you want to add, you know, a nice dark background right here, is you could just simply grab your local adjustment gradient, which is the same as your masking bug, but it's for local adjustments. You could just drop that down, and we'll kind of, you know, line it up with this area right here. So there we go. Now we have, you know, this area darkened, but we want to kind of remove it from this log here. Well, super easy. Grab your local adjustment brush, set it to paint out, and then you could just go in here and you could paint that darkness out from whatever area you want, so that you have, you know, that sand around it dark, and it kind of subdues it, but then you can leave, you know, this area of the log lightened up so that it's still your subject in the photo. So now if we, you know, turn this on and off, I really like how it's kind of subdued that area around our sand. And now, you know, if we hit the / key on our keyboard, we've really created, you know, a nice sort of unique looking photo in just, you know, a local adjustment and a couple of different filters. All I added was a LUT beforehand. So I just added a black and white LUT and then cropped it. But you guys get what I'm saying. You guys have this nice lens blur on here, and then we added a local adjustment, and then we masked that out. And sorry, I can actually go back here and we can view that, and you'll see what I did there. I just set that adjustable gradient down when set to all right, lay that adjustable gradient down, and then I just grabbed my adjustment brush, set it to paint out, and then just removed part of that area. And you'll notice that it's set to paint out. If I want to remove this part of the area and I view it, it's, you know, remove that as well. But I could go back, and if I wanted to paint that in, I could do that as well. And then if I wanted to, you know, paint some darkness in over here to kind of subdue this area, I could do that as well. So you're not confined to the first mask you make. That's probably a good rule to think about, is you're not confined to that first mask, because you can always, you'll notice that I added that adjustable gradient down here, created that mask right there, but then I removed part of the mask and then added other areas that I wanted masked simply by using my adjustable gradient and my my adjustment brush.
Probably a good time to jump in and say
Yeah.
you can stack layers as well in local adjustments. So if you,
Yeah,
there's
you
a
can
couple
add
people asking about how to keep those separate.
Okay, yeah. So say, we'll just actually reset this, and I'll do this real quick again. It's pretty easy to do. And say you wanted to, you know, add a new local adjustment layer. What I would do probably is you can click on these, and then you can rename it. I'll just rename this sand and log. And now say I want to maybe add a little bit of exposure onto this area back here. I can add a new local adjustment layer. I'll double click it, and I'll just rename it cliffs. And I can set it to lighten, maybe pull up the shadows a little bit. And you'll notice that once I added that layer, I have my local adjustment brush already selected. Well, it's set to paint out, so I'll just Shift X, put it to paint in, bracket keys on my keyboard again, and just brush in some light. maybe kind of shore this up down here. And then say we wanted to add maybe a little bit more detail onto our log here. Rather than going into your overall settings, adding dynamic contrast, you could quickly just grab a new local adjustment layer, hit detail, and then you could just paint in some nice detail onto your log. You could rename that log detail. Then you can hide those, and now you have all of these local adjustment layers, you know, nice and tidy and closed up so that you can see what you're kind of dealing with. And then if I hit, you know, if we turn these on and off, you know, and those three local adjustment layers, we've really, you know, made this photo come to life and not a whole lot of action. So another great tool that if you're adding a bunch of different local adjustment layers and you're kind of sick of whenever you add them, they're kind of always open and stuff, you can just go up here and you can go to, so window, and then you can click solo mode. And that's basically going to keep these either, it's going to keep them open like this, or if you go back and you go into solo mode again, it's going to make sure that only one is open at a time to keep you organized. So if you don't mind having these, you know, multiple open at the same time, you could keep solo mode off. Or if you like being a little bit more organized and you want just one open at a time, you could click solo mode and make sure that's on. So yeah, those are kind of, is there any more questions about any local adjustments or anything like that?
There's a couple people asking, how are these just stacked as layers on top of the image? Are these more like filters and local adjustments?
Okay, so basically your local adjustment layers are, think of them as filters. They're kind of the same exact thing. These are just, if you went in here and added a filter and you added, I'm going to go off solo mode, and you added a filter and say you added like a tone enhancer, you're kind of going to have the same options as you would in local adjustments, but they're just kind of used for different things. So now what you're doing is you're masking on a filter, and then you have these different layers of filters. It's just the same as inside of your local adjustment layers. They're just non-destructive adjustment layers that you're adding onto your photo just to spruce it up in, you know, different specific areas. It's just like using your filters. It's just a different sort of a different way of going about it, I guess. They're kind of the same. They're kind of interchangeable in the sense that they're both applying different effects onto your shot. And I would say the biggest difference is that when you add a layer onto or add a local adjustment layer, it's automatically set to concealing the mask, and then you paint it on. Whereas if you add a filter, it's automatically applying that entire mask to your photo. So if I hit dynamic contrast here, it's going to apply dynamic contrast to my entire shot, rather than if I applied a local adjustment layer and it was telling me to, you know, paint that in where I want it. So sorry, what?
Oh, I was going to say, while you're there, there's a customer asking, how would you save these adjustments in effects?
Okay, so say you have, we'll remove this lens blur because when creating presets, if you're using like blurs or anything like that, it's kind of tough to create those as presets because not a whole lot of photos use blur. But if you do want to create this as a preset, you could just simply go up to settings and save settings as a preset. And this is basically going to take, and you'll see down here you have different names, or I mean different settings that you can apply. So you'll notice that you have all settings. So if I unclick that, and if I added anything inside of develop, inside of, you know, the tone and color or the details or anything like that, I can select those. Say I have these effect settings, which is, you know, lens blur and LUTs or any other filters I like to add, I can select that so that it's added onto the preset. And then, you know, I have my local adjustments. So I could select the adjustable gradient tool, which is all those settings. Now if I package this up, and I'll just put Cape Disappointment, because that's where I was, I can click that. And now if I, we'll just hit F on our keyboard and go over to here. Now what I can do, once this loads here, So I can go into Donna's Frogs and I can click Cape Disappointment and it'll apply that filter onto my photo. Obviously the blur isn't probably where I want it, but that black and white honestly does not look too bad. So if I just went to lens blur and turn that off, you know, now I have a nice look on my shot, and it was all done with just creating that one preset. So presets are incredibly easy to make. Once you created a nice style for your shot with adding different filters and layers, just go up to Settings, Save Settings as a preset, and it'll, you know, you can create them incredibly easily.
So I think there's also some confusion, Dylan, when you jump between modules. So I think people are confused how things are being saved in effects and developed to your images. I mean, it doesn't look like you're saving anything, but all those adjustments are still there.
Okay.
So could you talk a little bit about sidecar files and how, you know, everything's non-destructive?
Totally. So basically, whenever you open up a photo inside of Photo RAW, it's going to create a sidecar file for you. And that sidecar file is just going to be stored wherever that main image file is stored. And that's going to make sure that none of these edits or local adjustments or anything that we do to our shot inside of Photo RAW destructs or alters our main photo. That sidecar file is what's going to be saved, or is what's going to be saving all of these you know, adjustments and whatnot. So, and I'll just show you guys real quick. If I go in here, oops. Real quick, I'm gonna grab my Finder folder. And I'm just gonna go in here, I'll look at some of these photos. So I'll just go here. So you'll notice that a bunch of these files in here have this sidecar file, and I can make this bigger. This sidecar file, which is on, I have the picture of her, and then I have this sidecar file which says .on1. Basically, this sidecar file is holding all of my non-destructive edits, my local adjustments, whatever I do to this photo, and it's storing that inside that sidecar file. And then once I open that image up inside of Photo RAW, say I open this image up, it's going to put those edits and styles onto that photo where I can either readjust or remove or export it into, you know, the finished product. And once you export a photo, it's going to take all of those adjustments and whatnot, and it's going to apply that, and then you're going to have, you know, a final image with those applied to it, but it's not going to affect your main image file. You're basically, Photo RAW in essence is just pulling images from wherever you have them stored, whether it's like a hard drive or a different computer or, you know, your cloud storage, and you're just editing. I like to think of it as just like a ghost. You're just editing like a ghost file of that main image, and then you're exporting it. So you're never, ever really destructing or altering that main image file. Those are all of the edits are just stored in your sidecar files. I hope that answered your question, Mo.
Yeah, it did. And just this does apply to Windows and Mac. It's not just for the Mac. Sidecar files work on Windows and Mac. And yeah, I think that was a great explanation. If anyone does have any questions on that, just throw it into the Q&A module. I'm doing my best to get to all of you guys pretty quickly here. So if you have anything else, Dylan, just keep on going through it. But I think we are getting close to the end.
Okay, yeah, we're getting really close. I just want to show you one other quick way that you can do some different things with masks. So we'll actually just go, and I'm going to grab, oops, sorry here. We'll go find a nice, cool photo. Here we go. So say we have this photo here, and we want to apply, say we want to brighten up our airplane here, and we don't want to sort of brighten up any of the areas around it. What we can do is we can go into our local adjustments, and we can hit lighten. And what I would recommend if you're using a local adjustment to lighten is maybe select the lighten preset, but then boost your shadows a little bit, just so it's a little bit more even even toned when you're pulling up those darker areas. And then what you can do is you can just brush this on. Probably not going to be perfect, but I'll give you guys an idea. And another great thing about Photo RAW, whenever you're brushing on presets or styles, or you're brushing on, exposure, is you don't really have to be incredibly exact when you're brushing it on, because you literally can just go over to your opacity, and I just pull it down all the way, and then just kind of incrementally pull it up. And it'll, you can see, how it's adding it onto your photo, how it's looking, so you can get, a better gauge of what you're doing to your shot. So now what I can do is, if I go into my masking options here, I can copy this mask and say I want a different mask to deal with maybe some saturation and some detail. I can quickly add a different layer. Or sorry, let's go back and we'll just view this mask. We'll view it real quick. Probably not the best airplane mask you've ever seen in your life, but it gets the job done. So if we go back, and now what we can do is go into this other local adjustment pane here, and we'll just click detail, and then let's just heat it up so you can see what I'm talking about, or we'll cool it down so you can see what I'm talking about. And now we can just go up here, and then we can just paste it, and it'll apply it to that area that we had already brushed in by simply just using that same mask we had before. So copying and pasting masks is also an incredibly easy way. For this one, we could honestly even just go and we could add a layer, and we'll lighten, pull up the shadows, grab our luminosity mask, view it. We'll play with this a little bit. That probably works. And then we can view it again, and we'll just add a little bit of contrast here. And then you could even copy that mask, go up, we'll do detail and then saturation, and we'll cool it down again. And then go back in and paste it, and it'll do the same thing as you did before. So copying and pasting masks, incredibly great way to kind of pull over different edits from different layers and then put them onto other local adjustments or effects. You can do that inside of your local adjustments, or you can do it inside of effects with filters. So yeah, are there any questions on that, Mo, before we kind of wrap this up?
No questions at all. I think everyone's just watching in amazement.
All right, guys. Well, again, thank you so much for watching. That's kind of all I have for masking and brushing. We'll probably have another one of these later down the line, because it was a pretty good turnout, and I'm happy to see you guys learning about different masks, because it's going to really enhance your post-processing photography skills. So once again, thanks so much, guys. And this webinar is going to be recorded. We'll post this on our blog, YouTube, and Facebook later today. So feel free to check that out. I'll add that link in the description to that how to create a dynamic sky video. So if you guys are curious about how to mask out a sky or kind of blend it, that should give you a better idea. But yeah, we'll end this right now. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next one.